Hello, and welcome to my talk, From Farm Museum to Absolute Unit. This is a pre-recorded talk, and I'll be going very slowly so that I can hit the 30-minute mark, after which there'll be questions. I won't be offended if you make a cup of tea, put Star Wars on in the background, or pick your nose, because I cannot see you. Also, welcome to my house. I'd love if we'd be able to be doing this in person, but instead you get me and my very messy shelving in the background. To introduce myself, I'm Adam Koszary, and I live in Reading, which, if you don't know, Reading is the largest town in England. It's famous for a festival, for confusing book lovers the world over, a local man that we call Reading Elvis, and the invention of the biscuit tin. But Reading is probably most famous to a select group of people for being the home of the Museum of English Rural Life, a part of the University of Reading, which I'll now refer to as the Mill, even though saying its full name would definitely get me to that half-hour mark. So in 2018, the museum had already had an interesting couple of years. Alongside people much smarter than me, some of whom were part of this conference, I worked on the redevelopment of the entire museum, which reopened to the public in 2016. After that, Arts Council England gave us funding for a digital transformation project, looking at digital skills, new technologies, and how to make the most out of our website and social media. It was at the tail end of this project when I was sat in my office on Twitter, searching our archive for an image relevant to International Unicorn Day, in that time-honoured tradition of shoehorning museum objects into tangentially relevant hashtags on social media, which is when I came across this absolute unit, which is what I then tweeted, and it eventually achieved around 30,000 retweets and over 100,000 likes on Twitter. I think I first realised this was kicking off when I was on a bathroom break and texting my colleague at the time, our marketing manager, Alison Hilton, saying that something might be kicking off, and then spending the rest of the evening on my train ride home and eating a curry with my laptop on my lap, desperately dealing with the situation. Now, if that phrase, absolute unit, makes no sense to you, it was inspired by this original tweet of a large man standing next to the Queen. The phrase absolute unit essentially means an impressively large person or animal, which this sheep definitely was. It can be seen a bit like fat shaming, but we only ever used it in a very celebratory way because this sheep is just very impressive by its size. And it was that size because it was bred both for mutton and for its fleece, making it especially large. The image is of an Exmoor horn ram, taken in 1962 at the Devon Show, and was featured in the Farmer and Stock Breeder Journal, which the Mill Archive now looks after. The success of this tweet, though, was not normal for a museum like the Museum of English Rural Life. We did not tend to go viral, but in many ways it made sense. People on the internet like the quirky, the unexpected, and they really like funny things. And a small English museum about rural life being under the viral spotlight was almost as entertaining as a tweet itself. I never expected, for instance, to be in conversations with people called Lil Swampass on Twitter, but this viral moment created a lot of new opportunities for meeting new people. But nevertheless, there was a large element of right place, right time, right content. But luckily we knew how to take advantage of it. Our director, Kate, trusted us to build on the original tweets. We could have left it running just as it was, and it probably would have done okay, but I don't think it would have done as well if we didn't have that freedom to then have funny conversations with people, or adding new memes, and essentially milking this meme for all it was worth. We did call the sheep Steve, but it didn't really catch on. Colleagues at the Mill also jumped in, whether it was exploring the original journal the sheep featured in the archives, going on a bit of an adventure, writing a blog on animal genetics to explain why the sheep was so big and giving it a bit of context, and also creating t-shirts which were shipped across the world. I believe the Mole has just released a new range of shirts, as well as mugs and other things as well, if you go to their shop on their website. We also then introduced all of our new followers to the museum in the same tone, explaining that actually we weren't just a meme account, but a real museum, because we had a ton of new followers who only knew us because of that sheep. But it was quite important to us to say, yes, but there's also this entire building and collection and lots of other things that you should come and see and get excited about. And when you see incredibly popular posts on social media, these viral posts, you'll also notice that the people who make them don't necessarily have a lot of followers. And I believe we managed to add thousands of new followers because it was clear that we had a lot more to offer if people followed us, and that it wasn't just a one-off. Its legacy means it now has a page on knowyourmeme.com. It got into the newspapers. Elon Musk talked about it and offered me a job at Tesla because of it, but that's a story you'll have to hear if you buy me 3 pints, I think. And 3 years on, it's fair to say I'm a little bit sick of the whole thing. But it was still an amazing experience for the museum. And luckily it wasn't a one-off. The tweets and its tone inspired future content from the Merle. We had further viral successes involving a journal where a child doodled a picture of a chicken in trousers. I think it was a 17th century journal. And we had a story of a bat that got stuck in our archives. We even got the university to give it a library card. And we took the opportunity to teach people about the migration of bats from Eastern Europe and the impact of climate change, which comes in, this is where it's very handy to have someone on staff, a volunteer in this case, who also happens to volunteer for a bat conservation trust. We also taught people how to identify a bat by looking at its genitalia. Apparently a male has genitalia that's like an albino hedgehog, which is fun. Joe Vaughan, who currently runs the social media, has since built on this success to reach new heady heights. And the results mean that our Twitter following grew from about 10,000 to over 130,000 by the time I left the museum, and I think it's now on about 155,000, which is bigger than pretty much all regional museums, like big city museums in the UK. It's only really the national museums who beat us on Twitter followers. With that becomes a bigger profile, more people know about the museum. We also have tourists, and you've got to imagine tourists, they might only have a week in the UK to explore all that it has to offer, all the sightseeing and the history of London, to the spires of Oxford, to the musical heritage of Manchester, going to Edinburgh, Cardiff, Lake District, Stonehenge, Salisbury's famous spire. And instead they were dedicating one of their precious days taking the train to visit Reading and the Museum of English Rural Life on the strength of one tweet about a sheep, which I still find kind of insane. But the comments they left in our visitor book were just heartwarming to read. But one of the most important lessons from the tweet was something we had actually been shouting about for some time already. And that is that social media it's not about broadcasting and telling people things. It's not like putting an advert in the paper or having a leaflet where people can't talk back to you. It's about having conversations, and it's also about giving people what they want, which is usually something interesting and amusing. In the Merle's case, we used humour and conversation as the gateway drug to that most life-wrecking of addictions, rural history. Because galleries, libraries, archives and museums are used to controlling their own spaces. For the most part, we decide what to put on the walls and to dictate the experience of a visit. We can run community co-curation, we can do visitor surveys, but for the vast majority of visitors, they come, they read the label, they enjoy it or they don't, they might have a cup of tea and they leave. But there's very little opportunity for interaction, for having a conversation with staff and sharing their own experiences. I often found myself wanting to go down into the galleries and kind of stand behind people as they read the interpretation and then ask them what they thought and ask if they had any more questions. And then again, it's extremely rare that people would also be able to experience the vast amounts of material that we hold in storage, of which the absolute unit photograph of that sheep was one. It has since been put on display because of this campaign. But that's not to say that we do a bad job of on-site interpretation. We all do fantastic jobs, particularly considering the medium that we're working with. But we simply can't be everywhere at once to have that dialogue with visitors. I always feel like a tour guide for every visiting group would be the ideal scenario in a museum, but that's just impossible. On social media, however, we do have more of an opportunity to have that dialogue. But we also don't have a captive audience in the same way we do when someone enters a museum. We don't dictate the experience on social media. They can take it or leave it. Because social media is intended to build connections between people and also obviously to mine their data for advertising and for tracking. But that's a whole other conversation. And museums, frankly, are not people. We are not particularly anyone's friends unless we make an effort to come across as friends. We are interlopers on people's time and interests. And people don't usually log on and say, oh, I want to know exactly this thing about rural history. They're logging on to see the latest memes about the Euros Cup or for Love Island. I don't know if people abroad might get the reference of Love Island, but if you Google it, you'll get a pretty clear idea of what that show is. So people are invariably on social media to learn something new and waste time. Having a museum account pop up and tell you what a billhook is rarely what people need, I would say. I would be interested, but it's a niche group. It's simply a different context to our galleries. And it's far easier to just ignore museums on social media. Whereas it's more of a conscious decision to both visit and leave and interact with a physical museum. And talking to people in the same way we do with our gallery labels will only get us so far. We can't just copy and paste that interpretation onto the internet and expect it to work in that context. And in particular for rural museums, we simply have to work harder than other museums. Particularly the museums in the UK full of things that we've looted and pillaged from across the world. They might have big name artists, jazzy international exhibitions. We have wagons, which means we need to tell our most interesting stories, to engage in conversation, and also leave some room for pure fun and entertainment just to compete. Because museums, I say museums are not people, but they are staffed by people. When people think of the museum, they think of the bricks and mortar, of the objects, of their memories of visiting. They don't necessarily always think of it as a friendly face. I'm generalising, but in general, that is the perception. So we need to make it clear that there are humans behind our social media and to tell our stories authentically. And the trick is packaging the deep knowledge and enthusiasm of our staff, the contents of our collections, in a way that achieves our objectives without people ignoring us on social media. And we do this by teasing out the emotive core of the stories we have to tell, by reacting to online trends to make sure we're relevant, and sometimes telling jokes. But you also then need to sneak in the deeper history and context, the mission-led part of what we do, in kind of a way like burying the lead, though not necessarily all of the time. Essentially, we need to understand that we need to adapt to social media and how people consume content, rather than the other way around. And that's not just putting something up and saying you should consume it and enjoy this piece of content because we're a museum and we say so. Because people are seeking authenticity, novelty, and anything which holds their interests. And ultimately, that's what the Absolute Unit tweet taught us. And it taught us to ignore our fatalism. I don't pretend to speak for everyone who works in rural museums, obviously. But for me, there was always a sense that we were for a niche audience, that it would be impossible to appeal to a broader public with what we had to offer. But actually, excuse me, people are interested. They're interested in how their ancestors worked and lived. They're interested in how to live sustainably, using the lessons from the past and the present. Where our food comes from, our traditions, our stories, and our big sheep. God, no idea why I didn't bring a glass of water for this. Very often it's not the stories, it's not that people aren't interested in the stories we have to tell. It's they're not interested in how we're choosing to tell them. And actually the bar isn't as high as you might think. Like you might think, oh God, we need to become master storytellers. We have to create all these dazzling, highly produced videos or articles or spend hours and hours on single posts. But the bar isn't as high as that. I saw this video last week on reddit.com. If you don't know what Reddit is, it's where users submit videos and pictures and links and the community votes them up or down depending on whether they like it or not. And it was a video simply showing all the different parts of a working water-powered sawmill in Canada, part of a museum. And it had over 8,000 upvotes and dozens of people in the comments asking what the belts were made of, how much horsepower it has, and how often they change the saws. Now, I'm actually part of a watermill Facebook group, which definitely felt like a community talking to itself. But I think sometimes we forget that most people don't have the experience of the things that we take for granted in our museums. And there is an appetite for our content if we can get it across simply but effectively. But what's often holding us back are the classics of anything that holds us back in our work. It's having the right resources. It's having the infrastructure in place. It's the training, but it's also having the right people. It's also simply how we communicate. Because other museums have had success with this type of more light-hearted content. There are places like Yorkshire Museums Trust, who've been using their collections to react to trending memes, like this one with Bernie Sanders. And they've also been running their popular curator battles on Twitter, where they encourage other museums and museum workers to share objects and stories based on a theme. Normal people have also been using objects and artworks for their own memes, particularly classical artworks, though annoyingly they rarely credit their sources. So what I'm saying is there is a way to use our collections in this way, but not all of us necessarily know how to do it properly. And I'm not saying be funny, because that's honestly one of the most terrifying commands you can ever be given. Because sure, fun and funny content is nice, it might get you more followers, it achieves its purpose, but you still need to pursue your whole mission. You need a diversity of content, but it needs a human voice. And one thing I always tell people is to write their posts in the same style as they would explain something to someone in person, to keep that authenticity and enthusiasm. And while fun and funny content is an important part of the mix, it shouldn't be everything that we do. We still need to discuss serious issues facing the world and communicate complex research topics. Sustainability and how we farm are integral to not just the economy, but also how we tackle climate change and how we adapt to our changing world. A museum also needs to convince people to visit. We need to survive on visitor income and use our services. We also need to inspire them with our content. We need to keep them entertained as well as to educate them. But this diversity of content can never be the job of just one person. A social media manager sits between the public and the organisation, so they know what is trending and interesting to people on the internet, but they need help in adapting what's relevant in the museum to the internet. And in places which can't afford someone dedicated to producing that content, which, let's face it, is pretty much everyone, it's the job of people working directly with collections and the public to adapt their knowledge and enthusiasm for the internet. We're almost getting to the stage where digital responsibilities can't just be siloed in one person or department. It's part of everyone's job now. And that requires a whole organisation working together, understanding its own strengths and weaknesses, and having the right infrastructure and skills to know what content to create, and perhaps more importantly, what not to create. And there's this misconception that it has to be everything or nothing, that we need to post every day, or that every post has to be a massive success. We look at museums like the Black Country Living Museum on TikTok, with over 1 million followers. I think they're the most followed museum on TikTok. But we forget that all they did was play to their strengths. They have a cast of paid and volunteer actors on their site, and they have a marketing manager who understands TikTok as a platform and how to adapt the museum to it. Not every museum has those circumstances, and they can't achieve what the Black Country Living Museum has done. But neither should they, because we each have our own unique selling points, which might be suitable for another form of content, for a different channel. We don't all have to do the same thing because it's worked for someone else, in the same way that I wouldn't expect every single museum to start tweeting about big sheep, but it does actually still work pretty well, to be fair. But behind the absolute unit tweet were some critical foundations. This by no means was just me and my baby. This was a whole museum effort. Because we'd already had the conversation with our archive colleagues about the ethical and proper use of collections. So we knew what images we could and could not use on social media. And this might be a privilege of having a bit of money and funding, but we exported our entire digitized collection to a digital asset management system where people could have different levels of access, where they could just view things, where they could download things, and our archive staff could tag collections for whether we could not use particular collections or images, whether because they were under copyrights or because there are ethical considerations, and which images they were essentially saying, use for social media, you don't need to check it with us. We're happy for you to use it in whatever way you see fit. And this allowed us to avoid the usual friction between collections teams and people posting digital content, where people in digital content don't quite understand all the issues relating to collections. Collections don't necessarily always understand what works for digital content. It was essentially establishing the ground rules and the red lines, and then operating within that framework. We'd also already built a network on social media. We had nearly 10,000 followers on Twitter to begin with, which is a good number. And it meant that we had a network ready to share our content. Because without this pre-existing audience built up over many years, the tweet would have failed. Pretty simply. You can have the best content in the world, but if your only follower is your mom, then it's not going to go anywhere. We also had a website ready, a website where we could easily write and publish blogs, and we had our colleagues trained in writing for web. We had a system, essentially, for writing and publishing content, so that when the tweet kicked off, our curator, Ollie, could easily write and get an article up on the website very rapidly. But perhaps most importantly, we trusted each other. I'm not breaking up with the emotion, as does my throat again. Perhaps most importantly, we trusted each other. Our director trusted us to run with the tweets and to have the freedom to write it in the first place. Our archive colleagues trusted us to use the collection sensibly, and all of our staff felt comfortable being part of that process. I say they were comfortable. No process is ever perfect, but we at least had a way for getting content online, and people generally understood what we were trying to achieve. And actually, people tie themselves up in knots about digital content, but as a process, it is actually quite straightforward. We're all matching the strengths of our museums and collections to audience needs, and having that audience need in mind is crucial. It can't just be what the museum wants. It's meeting that need halfway. So we find stories, whether they're small stories or big stories. We turn those into tweets, Facebook posts, Instagram posts, articles, videos, podcasts if you've got the resource. But in the end, it's all just text, images, video, and audio. In every museum, you can usually find someone who can write, you'd hope, someone who can take a photo, and someone who can edit an image. And if you can't, it is actually quite easy to learn. The trickier part is having someone who knows how to edit that text, how to build that story, and choose the content so that it matches the audience needs on social media. That's something that only comes from experience and practice. And also someone willing to waste their lives on social media to kind of understand how it ticks, which is definitely a big ask, which is why it's easier to find someone who's already wasted their life rather than ask someone to waste their life. You might also think that you don't have any content. Like what? What do we use? How do we actually get something that's happening in the real world, in the real collections, on site, onto online? But you just need to take a minute and think about what your museum does and what could easily be turned into content. We often call this a content audit, like listing all the activities we do and coming up with ideas for how we turn that into something for online. There could be an engaging person on your staff with unlimited knowledge, the kind of person who is always just giving you little tidbits of information in the kitchen or in the corridor. You could just sit in front of a camera for TikTok or for Instagram Reels or Facebook Live even. The Carnegie Museum of Natural History in the USA literally just has a curator who tells snail jokes in among their other content and is wildly popular. In the UK, I can imagine a curator exploring regional dialects or explaining the agricultural roots of words like linchpin and kingpin, and teenagers just lapping it up. There's a trend at the moment for finding things which you would think were uncool, but are actually quite cool, so long as they're honest and authentic. You could do a morning call if you have farm animals on your site. Cane Hill Countryside Centre in the UK posts a rush hour video every day where the farmer releases his animals into the yard, saying hello to them as they go, giving you a bit of information about them. And he's gone viral. And all he does is point a camera at some animals. You might have community groups you work with, or specialists in heritage craft. You can collaborate with them to unload their skills and experience in articles, videos, and posts. In my job at the Royal Academy of Arts, we're constantly asking the shop and our community groups, who are you working with at the moment? And do they have content that we could easily post on our own channels that we could collaborate on? Get them to do the work and then just fit it to your channels. And then there are digitized collections, which are the easiest posts imaginable. Just have the picture, have a bit of context, write it in an engaging way. You might even have film archives that are out of copyright, which you can post online. Where you go essentially depends on your museum, because the skills for decent social media are kind of readily known. It's all about editing an image, how to write, how to track the data, how to tell a story. But how can you harness the power of social media for your mission and organisational objectives? The key is to be ruthless. Very often we can fall into this trap of just writing things for ourselves. We think, we need to tell people about this project, so we write an article or a post that reads like internal reports. You need to focus only on what objectives you've agreed within your organisation, but always ask of your content, does anyone care? Would I read this as an average person? Does that headline draw me in, or will I scroll past? We are always just one post among many. We're posts competing with politics, with funny cat videos, people falling over, climate change. Everything is shouting in the world, and it takes effort to get above that fray. And this is where doing good social media starts to affect the rest of the organisation. You can't meet your goals if you don't know what your goals are. At the Merle, we use something called the Objective First Framework, where you first identify the objective, and it doesn't need to be a digital objective. It could be to reach a new type of audience for a project. It could be to raise money, fundraising, to digitize a collection, or even just to keep the museum afloat. Or it could just be to raise awareness of a project or a collection. Then we work backward to figure out how we measure the success of that objective, whether it's tracking revenue on the website and how much of it came from our campaign, whether it's changes in the social media audience demographics that we have, whether it's just classic reach and engagement of our posts. And then we brainstorm content ideas based on knowing the time and resources we have, but really trying to draw the ideas out of people and have a no idea is a stupid idea kind of atmosphere. And also knowing what has worked in the past, what has worked and what hasn't, to inform future ideas. It wasn't perfect, but it went some way to answering the questions, is this worth it? What are we actually achieving? which is very easy to ask of social media, what is the point? It's a way of proving the point. You also can't build your digital skills or take advantage of them without knowing your gaps. Now, this is a bit of work, but at the Merle, we also ran a digital skills questionnaire, asking how confident staff were in everything from how to Google technical issues to producing videos or writing content for the website. And then we made a plan for filling in those gaps. And you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help and to experiment and to make mistakes. Because I've done social media now for national organisations, and even they don't have everything together. They don't know exactly what to do all of the time. And we're all on the learning curve. We're all Googling YouTube videos to learn new skills, asking other people for their advice. But we need to do this work because social media stopped being a fad years ago. You could even say 10 years ago. People are simply online now. It's as important as reaching people physically. It's where they find out new information. It's where they decide where they're going to visit on the weekend. And it's where they spend their money shopping. There are people out there who are interested in what we do. We simply need to be there, to be human, but also to be interesting. And what the Absolute Unit tweet taught us is that we don't have to be shy. People will engage and learn from rural museums and their collections, but we have to meet people halfway. We have to stop navel-gazing and producing content that feels like it's made for other people already interested in rural museums and collections. We need to find a way of making it relevant to people who might not have thought they'd be interested in it. But behind that glib statement is a lot of work, I can't lie. But the core of it is starting with knowing what you want to do and achieve, and then working as a team to achieve it together. And part of that is to stop thinking of social media as an extra. Incorporate it into your work and your projects. Empower the people with the skills and the personalities to speak for your organisation on social media. And above all, have fun. You don't have to conquer the world straight away. Start small, take risks. You almost have nothing to lose. Thank you for listening to me.